The snow crunched under my boots as I walked up the familiar driveway, the yellow glow from my parents' windows cutting through the gray of a Minneapolis winter evening. The scent of pine from the wreath on the door mixed with the faint aroma of casseroles drifting out through the seams. I tightened my scarf and took a long breath before pushing the door open. The living room buzzed with relatives, coats piled on the sofa, voices layering over each other, the clink of glasses as cousins caught up on small-town gossip. My aunt waved at me with a bright smile, though her eyes scanned past me as if searching for someone more important. My father gave me a quick nod before returning to his conversation about property taxes. "Sweetheart, shoes off," my mother called the moment she saw me, pointing toward the rug. "You'll track salt in the house." Her tone was light, but it carried the same firmness she'd used on me when I was 12. I bent down, slipping off my boots, catching the smirk from my older sister Cressida as she leaned against the staircase rail in her tailored dress. "Mom still treating you like a teenager?" she teased. "She likes her traditions," I replied evenly, though inside I thought traditions are just excuses to keep me small. Dinner was served not long after, the long oak table stretched with bowls of steaming vegetables, roasts, and bread rolls. Plates clattered as everyone settled, the air warm with laughter and the smell of gravy. I sat midway down the table, trying to catch my mother's smile, but she was too busy leaning into Cressida's ear. A cousin I hadn't seen in years sat across from me. He grinned and asked, "So, what have you been up to? School? Work?" Before I could open my mouth, my mother's voice chimed over the hum. "She's still our baby girl," she said, her eyes shining at him. "Hasn't really decided what she wants just yet." I froze. The cousin chuckled. "Oh, you'll find your way, sweetie. No rush." He lifted his glass in a half-toast, dismissing me with a grin. Laughter bubbled from the end of the table where Cressida held court, recounting a story from her job at the bank. My mother's hand rested lightly on my shoulder as if to anchor me in the role she had just cast. I smiled politely, but my thoughts burned. At 31, I had built a company that grossed $5.7 million last year. Yet here I was, the baby girl. Maya Angelou's words echoed in my head. "There is no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside you." Tonight, I was carrying mine like a weight no one else wanted to see. As dessert was cleared and chatter continued, my father tapped his glass and announced that everyone should move to the living room for photos. Before that, however, the seating for the formal meal was finalized with place cards. My stomach tightened as I scanned the table. At the far end, near the kitchen door, I spotted my name card. Except it didn't even have my full name. In bold script, it read, Isolde. My chest tightened. "Looks like they got creative with your name," Cressida quipped as she glided past, settling comfortably in the center seat under a banner strung across the wall. "Congratulations, Cressida." She beamed as if it were a coronation. "Don't be dramatic," she added, smoothing her skirt. "It's just a chair." Uncle Rob chimed in from the other side, his laughter too loud. "At least they gave you a seat?" The table roared. Even my father chuckled, shaking his head as if it were all harmless fun. I lowered myself into the chair beside the clattering of dishes being cleared, the swing of the kitchen door brushing against my arm every few minutes. From where I sat, the view was of backs, shoulders, and the glare of overhead lights. I smiled at the jokes, nodding as though nothing stung, while inside, anger pressed against my ribs like a rising tide. Cressida lifted her glass in a practiced gesture. "Thank you all for supporting me this year," she said, her voice carrying across the table. "It means so much to know I have a family who believes in hard work and discipline." Her eyes flicked toward me briefly, a glint of triumph. I pressed my hands flat against my lap, forcing the corners of my mouth up. Out of sight, out of mind, that was where they had put me. As conversations picked up again, my mind slipped back to childhood moments. The science project I stayed up all night perfecting, only to be told at the school fair, "She's just the baby, her sister helped." The years when every decision was made without my voice, when my achievements were filed under cute, while Cressida's were mounted on the living room wall. The pattern hadn't changed. I was still the baby, still diminished, but the difference now was that I carried a secret. In my phone, tucked inside my purse beside the chair, was the dashboard of my business. Numbers that told the story my family refused to believe. Contracts, revenue streams, growth curves, all proof of a life they ignored. They didn't see it yet. They didn't care. But I knew. I knew the day was coming when silence would no longer be compliance, but strategy. When the baby they mocked would be the woman who silenced the room without raising her voice. As I settled back in the uncomfortable chair, the swing of the kitchen door nudging my elbow again, I glanced across the long table at my sister bathed in attention. My mother leaned close, brushing a strand of hair from my face, her voice a whisper meant only for me. "Smile for the pictures, baby girl. You don't want to ruin Cressida's night." I let the corners of my lips lift into a smirk I didn't feel. Inside, my thoughts were sharper than ever. One day soon, this baby would end the charade. The following Sunday, I slid into a pew at our church in Minneapolis, brushing melting snow from my coat sleeve as the organ hummed. The sanctuary smelled of coffee and perfume, with the faintest trace of potluck casseroles wafting from the hall, where volunteers were already setting up tables. I grew up in this congregation. Every corner carried echoes of childhood, of songs sung off-key and whispered gossip during sermons. The greetings started the moment my parents walked in. "Vera, I heard Cressida got that promotion," one woman exclaimed, pulling my mother into a hug. Another congratulated my father for raising such a brilliant daughter. Everywhere I turned, their voices buzzed with praise, and every sentence ended with Cressida's name. My mother glowed in their attention, her smile brightening as if she were the one promoted. When someone glanced my way, my mother deflected smoothly. "Oh, she's keeping busy," she said, patting my arm as though I were still 12. Still finding her path. And the conversation rolled on. That silence burned more than an insult. It was as if I didn't exist, as though all my years of effort had been invisible. After the service, we shuffled into the fellowship hall where coffee steamed in styrofoam cups and sugar cookies lined folding tables. The chatter rose to a steady hum. I lingered near the edge, nodding politely when I caught the sound of my name. "Isolde still doesn't have a real job, right?" a woman murmured to my mother. She must have thought I was too far to hear. My chest tightened. Mom didn't correct her. She only nodded with a tight smile. A neighbor joined in, smiling at me as if offering comfort. "Your parents said you're still looking for direction. Don't worry, dear, you'll land somewhere soon." I forced my lips into a smile. "Thank you," I said, steadying my voice. Inside, I seethed. I landed already. $5.7 million landed. The words of Mark Twain drifted through my mind. A lie can travel halfway around the world while the truth is putting on its shoes. That morning, the lie had sprinted through every pew, every coffee cup, every whispering mouth. My truth was still barefoot. I sipped my lukewarm coffee, forcing myself to nod along as if I agreed. But in my chest, rage simmered beneath the mask of politeness. We left the church for lunch at a diner nearby, the kind with vinyl booths and laminated menus sticky from years of syrup spills. Plates of burgers and pancakes slid onto tables, and the clatter of silverware mixed with laughter. My sister sat across from me, glowing in the center of attention as usual. She leaned back, her voice carrying across the table. "Oh, Isolde's busy with her little Etsy shop," she said with a laugh. "You know, selling trinkets online." The table erupted with chuckles. My father added, "Well, at least it keeps her out of trouble," shaking his head with a grin. I felt every laugh like glass shattering in my ears. "Come on," I said evenly, meeting Cressida's eyes. "You know it's not just a shop." She smirked. "Relax, it's just a joke." My uncle chimed in, "Hey, we're all proud of you girls, but banking, now that's real work. Online stuff. Who knows how long that lasts?" They returned to their meals, brushing away my existence with greasy fingers and casual cruelty. I clenched my fork but forced myself to remain composed. In their eyes, digital businesses were hobbies, distractions. Banks, law firms, those were the pillars of success. Their ignorance wasn't harmless, it was erasure. Inside, I whispered to myself, they think I'm fragile. They think silence means weakness. But silence, when sharpened, cuts deeper than any laugh. As the plates cleared and coffee was refilled, I stared at my reflection in the darkened window. The dismissals hurt because they weren't strangers' words. They were my family's. Strangers could doubt you. That was survivable. But when your own family ridiculed you, it carved something permanent. I reminded myself, I wouldn't argue today, not yet. But my silence was no longer surrender. It was a blade, sharpening with every laugh. When the laughter finally died down, my mother reached over, patting my hand as if soothing a child. "Don't take it too hard, baby. We just want the best for you." I lowered my gaze to my untouched plate, pressing a calm smile into place. In my chest, something clicked, firm, unyielding. A decision was forming. When we returned from church and lunch, my parents' house was already buzzing with voices. Relatives filled the living room, balancing coffee cups and plates of pie, while Cressida was once again the center of gravity. I slipped out of my coat and moved quietly toward the kitchen, my hand brushing the wood paneling I'd known since childhood. The air was thick with chatter, most of it circling back to my sister's promotion. "She really is remarkable," my aunt declared, her eyes lighting up as she recounted Cressida's last business trip. "So much discipline. You must be so proud." My mother nodded, her chin high, while my father leaned back in his recliner, smiling as if he were the architect of Cressida's success. No one asked me about my life, my work, or even how I'd been lately. I poured myself a cup of coffee, the bitterness sharp on my tongue, and leaned against the counter, listening. It's one thing to be mocked. That stings, but at least you're seen. What I felt now was worse. It was as though I had been erased entirely, a ghost in my own family's house. Later, I walked into the dining room where the long oak table was still set with desserts. I carried a folder I'd brought deliberately, something I thought might shift their perspective. Inside was a printed quarterly report from my company, numbers that proved I wasn't drifting aimlessly. "Mom, Dad," I began, holding the folder out as they sat down with relatives. "I wanted you to see this. It's real, not just a hobby." My father glanced at the papers, his expression flat. He gave the kind of smile reserved for children showing finger paintings. "That's nice, honey," he said, sliding the folder aside so he could rejoin a conversation about Cressida's promotion. My mother's eyes darted to me briefly. "We'll look at it later, baby. Don't interrupt." The words landed harder than any slap. Laughter rang out as Cressida told a story about a banking conference. The folder sat untouched in the middle of the table, my name on the cover page invisible among the half-empty plates. I sat down, staring at the glossy pages that meant so much to me and nothing to them. $5.7 million, and in this room, it weighed less than a casserole recipe. In America, we love numbers when they're in the bank, when they fit the story we already believe. But when they challenge our view, we dismiss them like lint brushed from a sleeve. A cousin leaned over, catching sight of the folder. "What's that?" Before I could answer, my father chuckled. "Just some side project she's been dabbling in." Heat rose in my chest, but I forced a measured breath. "It's not a side project," I said calmly. "It's my business." But my words were drowned by another burst of laughter as someone praised Cressida again. My mother reached for her coffee, already absorbed in another conversation. Hours later, as the gathering thinned, I found myself cornered by a younger cousin scrolling through his phone. He grinned and said, "Hey, want to see the photos from last Christmas?" I leaned over, curiosity tugging me, until I saw one group shot. My parents, Cressida, my aunts and uncles, all smiling broadly. But something was missing. Me. I frowned. Wait, I was there. The cousin flushed, fumbling with his screen. "Oh, I think it just fit better this way," he mumbled. "Or maybe I just didn't fit at all." The picture on Facebook showed a perfect family portrait. My absence was glaring, like a shadow cut out of a frame. Photographs are supposed to preserve memory, to tell the truth of who we were together. But this one had been turned into a weapon of erasure. I excused myself, the walls pressing too tightly, and stepped outside into the cool spring air. I clutched the unused financial report, its weight heavier than it should have been. The breeze carried the smell of fresh earth, a reminder that life renews even when old roots choke it. They weren't just mocking me, they were rewriting the family story without me in it. Toni Morrison once wrote, "Definitions belong to the definers, not the defined." Today, I realized my family had defined me out of existence, but I wasn't going to beg for a place in their narrative. I would create my own. As I turned back toward the house, I saw through the living room window. My parents beamed proudly at Cressida, their arms wrapped tightly around her shoulders for another family photo. The folder in my hand felt like lead. If they wouldn't let me in their picture, one day, they would beg to stand in mine. By early summer, the air in Minneapolis had softened, the snow long gone, and the grass in my parents' backyard was thick and green. Smoke curled from the grill where my uncle flipped burgers, the scent of charred meat and corn drifting into the humid air. Kids chased each other between lawn chairs, while the adults clustered in groups, drinks in hand, trading jokes and catching up. I balanced a tray of lemonade glasses and wove between the lawn chairs, unnoticed. As I set the tray down on the picnic table, I caught the sound of another cousin praising Cressida. "She's a rising star," my aunt said proudly. "Always knew she'd go far. Banking is no joke. Steady career, great benefits." My mother smiled as if she'd written Cressida's resume herself. My father added, "We raised our girls to be responsible, but Cressida, she's the model." No one looked in my direction. I stood quietly, watching the scene unfold. They celebrated her achievements as if her light was the only source of warmth in the family, while I stood in the shadows, invisible. Inside my chest, irritation swirled, threatening to boil over. It's amazing how people can cheer for one child while erasing another from the same story. Later, as I refilled cups, I overheard my father laughing with a neighbor. "You've always been good with money, Rob," the neighbor said, raising his drink. "Of course," Dad replied smoothly. "I've always managed things well, and I taught my kids to do the same." My hand froze around the pitcher. A flash of memory pulled me backward. Months earlier, my father had called me quietly one evening. His voice was low, almost embarrassed. "Sweetheart," he said, "I need a favor, just between us. My credit card bill, it slipped this month. If the bank sees it, my score will take a hit. Could you cover it? Just for now. I'll pay you back." I hadn't hesitated. I wired the money within an hour, no questions asked. He never mentioned it again, and now, standing in that backyard, hearing him brag about his financial discipline, the words cut deeper than I expected. "Raised us?" I muttered under my breath. "Or drained me?" I turned toward the house, fighting to keep my composure. Silence was no longer loyalty, it was complicity, and I was done being complicit. The evening stretched on with chatter and plates piled high with food. As the sun dipped, my father clinked his glass, calling for attention. "Friends, neighbors, thank you for being here tonight. We're so proud of our family." A neighbor, smiling warmly, raised his voice. "And what about your younger daughter, Rob? What's she up to these days?" The pause was brief but heavy. My mother's voice filled it, calm and dismissive. "Oh, she's still figuring it out. Looking for work." Laughter rippled around the circle. Someone chimed in, "That's okay, she's young." My fists curled tight in my lap. My jaw ached from holding my tongue. Young? I was over 30. My company had made more in a month than some of them had in a year. And yet, here I was, the child still finding her way. The humiliation wasn't just in my parents' words, it was in the smirks, the chuckles, the ease with which the lie rolled across the lawn. It was one thing to be dismissed privately, but another to be erased publicly, in front of neighbors. I forced my breath steady. Inside, a fire roared. As Eleanor Roosevelt once said, "No one can make you feel inferior without your consent." And that day, I silently swore. I would not give them consent anymore. I excused myself quietly and slipped into the garage, the air cooler, the smell of old tools and cut grass grounding me. My heart pounded so hard it echoed in my ears. Family loyalty had limits. I had bent, stretched, and carried burdens without acknowledgement. And now the weight was snapping. Leaning against the workbench, I whispered into the stillness, "The next time they try to diminish me, I will not stay silent. For years, I had swallowed words, thinking it was strength, but real strength, I realized, was drawing the line no one could cross. When I returned to the backyard, the sky had deepened to twilight, string lights flickering on above the patio. My mother leaned close as I passed, her smile sweet for the crowd, but her whisper sharp. "Smile, baby. Don't make things awkward." I did smile, my lips curving easily. But inside, everything had changed. The warning had already been given. The reunion hall smelled faintly of polish and catered food, banners strung across the high ceiling with my family's name printed in bold letters. Balloons bobbed at the tables, children darted between chairs, and relatives from out of state milled around with plates of appetizers. I walked in with a practiced, polite smile, nodding at familiar faces I hadn't seen in years. Almost immediately, the tide of attention rolled toward Cressida. "There she is," an aunt called out, pulling her into a hug. Compliments rained down, how radiant she looked, how proud they all were of her latest promotion at the bank. She beamed, and my parents hovered nearby like proud sponsors. "This is our baby girl," my mother said when she noticed me. She gestured vaguely as if I were a decoration. "Still figuring things out." The phrase cut sharper every year. The older I got, the more permanent that label became. I offered a small smile, but inside I wondered if they would ever see me as anything more than unfinished clay. Dinner began with the clink of silverware and the murmur of overlapping conversations. The hall was filled with the warmth of roasted meats and clattering dishes. I sat at one of the long tables across from a banker friend of my father's, a man whose laugh filled entire rooms. "You must be proud of Cressida," he said loudly, his fork poised mid-air, working so hard, always on call. That kind of discipline is rare. Then his eyes turned to me. "And what about you, Isolde?" Before I could open my mouth, my mother interjected with a cheerful laugh. "Oh, she has plenty of free time, doesn't she?" The banker chuckled. "Well, enjoy it while you can. Must be nice to have no worries." Laughter spread like wildfire across the table, bubbling over plates and glasses. Even my father shook his head with a grin. The sting was immediate. It felt like being shoved off a stage I had never asked to stand on, the spotlight swinging away as the audience roared. I kept my face calm, nodding as if it were all harmless. Inside, I compared the sound of their laughter to glass breaking, sharp, cutting, impossible to piece back together. Cressida leaned in, smirking. "Don't take it personally. We're just joking." "Of course," I replied, my voice steady. "Just a joke." But my thoughts told another story. Laughter wasn't innocent. It was a tool, one that cemented the hierarchy at this table. I had been cast as the carefree child with no burdens, no ambition worth naming. They laughed to keep me in that role. A line from Bob Dylan's music floated into my mind. "You're invisible now. You've got no secrets to conceal." That was me, mocked, erased, and invisible in a family portrait I no longer recognized. The evening rolled on, the hum of conversation occasionally punctuated by speeches. Toward the end, the master of ceremonies stepped to the microphone, holding a printed program. "We'd like to recognize the accomplishments of the Harlow family members," he announced. Applause broke out as names were read: a cousin for his military service, an uncle for his retirement milestone. My parents beamed as the MC's voice rang out. "And, of course, Cressida Harlow, recently promoted at the bank. Everyone clap." The hall erupted in cheers. Glasses clinked, relatives rose to their feet. For me, silence. I glanced down at the program sheet lying beside my plate. My name wasn't even printed, not overlooked by accident, omitted, officially absent from the record of my own family. No correction came from my parents. No one said, "You missed someone." I sat perfectly still, letting the realization spread through me. You don't just lose a seat at the table. Sometimes you are erased entirely, struck from the story as if you had never existed. I excused myself quietly, weaving through the crowd until I found myself standing in a hallway outside the main room. A mirror hung on the wall, reflecting my own face back at me. Composed, calm, but my eyes told the truth. Betrayal etched deep lines I couldn't hide. "I could scream," I whispered to the empty hall. But they'd call it drama. They'd laugh again. No. I steadied my breath. I'll sharpen this silence until it cuts. I no longer wanted their approval. That night, I felt something shift, like steel hardening in a forge. My anger had crystallized into resolve. Thomas Jefferson's words surfaced from memory. Rebellion to tyrants is obedience to God. And though my parents weren't kings, they had ruled over me with their version of truth for too long. When I returned to my seat, applause was still echoing around Cressida. She stood, gracious in her triumph, basking in the spotlight that had been handed to her again. I smiled faintly, my expression almost serene. They had forgotten my name tonight, erased me from their record. But deep inside, I knew, someday soon, mine would be the only name they remembered. The restaurant's chandeliers glowed warmly against polished wood, and the clink of glassware punctuated the low hum of classical music. I followed my parents into the dining room, my heels clicking against marble floors that smelled faintly of lemon polish. It was the kind of place reserved for special occasions, quiet, formal, and designed to impress. Everyone had dressed their best. My father's suit was neatly pressed, my mother's pearls gleamed, and Cressida glided into the room in a sleek navy dress that seemed to command attention on its own. She was seated near the center of the long table, glowing under the soft light, while I slid into a chair at the far side. The last reunion had ended with humiliation, and though no one mentioned it directly, I could feel the tension lingering, woven into the polite chatter and stiff smiles. Every setting became a stage for the same hierarchy, and tonight would be no different. I picked up my menu, scanning the delicate script, but my eyes strayed toward the faces leaning closer to Cressida, their admiration clear. My mother touched her arm lightly, beaming as though she were presenting a masterpiece. Inside, I thought, every dinner, every gathering, every moment is scripted to remind me of my role. Tonight, though, I'm not as malleable as they believe. The appetizers had just arrived when Aunt Astria turned to me with the kind of smile that never boded well. She leaned forward, her voice carrying across the table. "You know, dear," she began, "maybe it's time you thought less about business and more about marriage. A banker husband would stabilize your life, someone who could take care of you." Several heads nodded in agreement, chuckles rippling around the table. My mother added softly, "We just want the best for you, sweetheart. You don't need to exhaust yourself with little projects." My fork hovered above my plate. Heat rose in my chest, but I kept my composure. "Marriage isn't the insult," I said evenly, setting my fork down. "It's the assumption that I need a man's title to validate mine." The table went quiet for a heartbeat before nervous laughter broke out. Cressida smirked, sipping her wine. "Well, independence is nice, but security matters too." I held her gaze calmly. Ruth Bader Ginsburg once said, "Women belong in all places where decisions are being made." My decisions happen to involve business, not contracts signed with a groom. The words landed with a weight that shifted the air slightly. My aunt blinked, clearly not expecting resistance. My mother's smile faltered for the briefest moment before she recovered. No one pressed further, but the message was clear. They expected me to fold into their version of womanhood, and I had refused. Dinner carried on with forced politeness. The roast duck passed along the table, and wine refilled in tall glasses. Yet beneath the civility, my anger hummed steadily, waiting for the next strike. It came when dessert was brought out. Tonight's dinner doubled as a celebration for Cressida's latest promotion, and gifts were exchanged in her honor. A sleek black box was placed before her, wrapped in silver paper. "Oh, how lovely," she said, unwrapping it with exaggerated grace. Inside was a laptop, sleek, expensive, gleaming under the chandelier's glow. "From us," my parents said together, pride swelling in their voices. "Thank you, Mom and Dad," Cressida exclaimed, hugging them. "You always support me." The table clapped politely, but my breath caught in my throat. I recognized it instantly. I had ordered that very laptop weeks ago, shipped directly to my parents' house as a surprise gift for my sister. Quiet acknowledgement for once, even if I received no credit. And now, it was theirs. No glance toward me, no acknowledgement, just theft, dressed as generosity. Cressida stroked the keyboard lovingly. It's perfect. You really know what I need. I stayed silent, forcing my hands to remain steady against the napkin on my lap. Inside, fury coiled tight. It wasn't just erasure this time. It was theft, rewritten as love. My generosity, erased and repackaged to strengthen their narrative that they were the ones who lifted her. I looked around the table, faces smiling, nodding, satisfied with the performance. No one noticed my stillness. Later, I excused myself and walked toward the wide window overlooking the Minneapolis skyline. The glass reflected the glittering city lights, a world beyond this suffocating script. They thought my silence meant surrender. But tonight, it was strategy. My silence had teeth now. They think I'm still their child, I whispered to the glass. But I've grown into a storm they cannot contain, Martin Luther King Jr. once said, "There comes a time when silence is betrayal." Tonight, that betrayal burned in my bones. My silence had shifted, from shielding them to preparing myself. When I returned to the table, dinner was winding down. Laughter rose again, wine glasses tilted. Cressida hugged our parents, clutching the laptop proudly. My mother looked over at me with a satisfied smile, as though to say, "See, everything is as it should be." But I smiled back differently this time. They didn't know it yet, but the gift they stole was the last they would ever take from me without consequence. The banquet hall was dressed like a palace. White tablecloths draped over round tables, crystal glasses reflected the golden glow of chandeliers, and a string quartet played softly in the corner. Guests streamed in, many of them my parents' friends from church or my father's golf circle, all there to celebrate Cressida's latest promotion. Champagne flutes clinked as servers moved gracefully between tables. I followed my parents into the room, my heels clicking against the polished floor, and instantly felt it, the subtle shift, the way people's eyes passed over me before landing, as always, on Cressida. She stood in the middle of the hall, radiant, shaking hands, laughing effortlessly. Compliments cascaded around her like confetti. Relatives greeted me politely, quick hugs, brief smiles, but then turned to gush over her. My mother introduced me to a guest with a vague wave. "This is our baby girl. She's still finding her way." I smiled, polite, practiced. But inside, I thought, I'm not overlooked. I'm tolerated, like a chair in the corner. Present, but unnecessary. Dinner began with applause and speeches. Plates of filet mignon and roasted vegetables were served, the air thick with chatter and the steady pop of corks. For a moment, I let myself sink into the rhythm of forks and knives against china. Then my father's voice carried across the table. "You know," he said, his glass raised, "Isolde's online shop probably brings in $50 a month." The table burst into laughter. Uncles chuckled, a few guests nodded in amused agreement. My mother laughed too, though hers was nervous, brittle, as if she sensed she had crossed a line, but couldn't stop herself. I pressed my palms against my napkin, steadying my breath. $50. Try 5.7 million. But I didn't say it aloud, because this wasn't about numbers, it was about erasing me. "Come on, Dad," I said softly, my voice calm but sharp. "That's not true." "Oh, sweetheart," he chuckled, patting my hand as though I were a child. "Don't be so sensitive. We're just joking." Cressida smirked, adding fuel. "Besides, you've always had more free time than the rest of us. Must be nice." Laughter rolled again, louder this time, until it filled the room. Inside, I burned. Harry Truman's words pulsed in my memory. "If you can't stand the heat, get out of the kitchen." I was tired of being roasted alive in silence. Their laughter wasn't harmless. It was a weapon, reducing years of work to a punchline. I lowered my gaze, swallowing the fury. But my silence wasn't weakness. Not anymore. It was sharpening, waiting. The evening dragged forward with more toasts, more empty words of pride. At the end, as coffee was being poured, a server approached me discreetly. He set a leather folder in front of me. Confused, I opened it. My eyes scanned the total, thousands of dollars. The bill for the entire evening. My father leaned close, his voice low. "You don't mind helping out, right? You're good at handling numbers." I froze, staring at the receipt, my name scrawled across the billing slip. Not theirs, mine. My mother smiled sweetly across the table, toasting Cressida again. To our shining star. None of this would be possible without family support. Everyone raised their glasses. Applause erupted. And I sat there, the banquet paid for with my silence. They had celebrated her with my money. They had stolen my success and fed it into their narrative, my role reduced to hidden financier, the invisible subsidy for their pride. I folded the bill slowly, slipping it back into the folder, and placed it on the table as if it were harmless. But inside, fury mixed with bitter clarity. They didn't just mock me tonight. They played me. They played dirty. When the last toast ended, I excused myself and walked into the crisp autumn night. The wind whipped against my face, clearing the fog of wine and laughter. My heart raced as I stood in the parking lot, staring at the glittering lights of downtown Minneapolis. I thought of every moment, every gift I'd given that was stolen, every debt I covered that was never acknowledged, every time my name had been cropped out of a picture or skipped in a speech. This was the last straw. They didn't just play me, I whispered into the cold. They played dirty. Abraham Lincoln's words struck me with fresh clarity. You can fool all the people some of the time, but you cannot fool all the people all the time. Tonight, they fooled themselves. I walked toward my car, heels striking hard against the pavement. Behind me, the muffled sound of laughter spilled from the banquet hall, spilling into the night air. They believed I was still powerless, but when the truth surfaced, their laughter would choke in their throats. The night outside my apartment pressed dark and heavy against the windows. The hum of the city was faint, just the occasional car rolling down the street below. My laptop glowed on the dining table, the screen the only light in the room. I stared at it, the numbers sharp and bold at the top of the dashboard. $5.7 million in revenue. I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. While they dismissed me, my business outgrew their wildest dreams. Every late night, every delivery tracked, every decision I made alone. None of it needed their permission, their validation, or their applause. The glow from the screen spilled across my hands, making the dark room seem even darker. It felt symbolic, power shining right in front of me while the world around me refused to see it. Warren Buffett's words came to mind. The best investment you can make is in yourself. I had, and it had paid off. I exhaled slowly. Pride throbbed in me, but it mixed with loneliness. Pride doesn't laugh with you at the dinner table. Pride doesn't defend you when your name is skipped on a program sheet. But it does remind you that you are not powerless, no matter how much they want you to believe it. For a moment, I closed my eyes and remembered the laughter, the jabs. The banquet bill slipped discreetly into my hand. Each humiliation was a thread, and now the fabric of their story was fraying. I opened my eyes again. The number was still there, 5.7 M. Not a dream, not $50 a month. Reality. My reality. The following week, I found myself back in my parents' house for another dinner. Snow clung stubbornly to the corners of the yard, frost curling against the windows. The table was set with my mother's best china, candles flickering, and my father unusually tense. Guests filled the room, but tonight, one stood out. Mélisse Dufour, the banker my parents often name-dropped in conversations. I'd heard about her for years, always presented as a symbol of credibility and prestige. And now she was here, seated at the head of the table beside Cressida. The meal began with chatter about the economy, property values, and success stories in the community. I stayed quiet, my fork slicing through roast chicken while I listened. The hum of voices was steady until Mélisse shifted the conversation. Local entrepreneurs are becoming quite interesting to us, she said smoothly. Some of the most innovative work isn't coming from banks, but from individuals who built something on their own. Her words made the room tilt ever so slightly. I saw my father stiffen, my mother's lips purse. Then her eyes landed on me. Isolde Marwood, isn't it? She asked, her tone crisp but warm. I've heard of your company. We'd like to discuss a potential partnership. The table froze. Forks hovered in midair. For a moment, it was as if the oxygen had been sucked out of the room. My father stammered, Her company? You mean that hobby? Melis raised a brow. No hobby, a real business, profitable, innovative. Silence. My mother forced a tight smile, and Cressida's face stiffened, the glow of her spotlight dimming in an instant. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. The shift had already happened. The one name they refused to say was now on a banker's lips. The weight of that moment pressed against everyone. I watched my parents' faces falter, forced smiles stretched too thin. Cressida gripped her glass, her knuckles pale, and I simply sat, steady, savoring the silence. For years they had played me, rewriting the narrative to keep me small. But the world outside was catching up to the truth. Tonight was just the beginning of their unraveling. Oprah's words echoed in me. The greatest discovery of all time is that a person can change their future by merely changing their attitude. Tonight, mine had shifted, from silence to revelation. As the room tried to regain its rhythm, my father raised his glass with a shaky hand, forcing a laugh. To Cressida, and all she has accomplished. Before anyone could follow, Melis interrupted. No, she said firmly, her gaze still on me. I want to focus on Isolda's work. It's impressive. And just like that, the cracks in their story began to show. Cracks that would soon shatter the facade entirely. The table was set as if for royalty. Silver cutlery gleamed beneath candlelight, the crystal glasses sparkled, and the faint scent of rosemary and roasted lamb floated from the kitchen. My parents had spared no expense. This wasn't just another dinner, it was a performance. And the star, as always, was meant to be Cressida. I slipped into my seat, observing the choreography unfold. My mother fussed with Cressida's hair, whispering something that made her laugh softly. My father raised his glass prematurely, already glowing with pride. They had invited their most respected guest, Melis Dufour, the banker whose name carried weight in every social circle my parents aspired to. As the small talk warmed the room, my mother turned the spotlight where she wanted it. Cressida has been working so hard, she said, her voice loud enough for the table. Her promotion was only a matter of time. Yes, my father added. We couldn't be prouder. I cut into my bread quietly, chewing with patience. Inside, I told myself, it's a performance, and for once, I am not here to be the background. Tonight will not go the way they expect. Dishes were served, wine poured, and the hum of polite laughter carried us into the heart of the evening. That's when Melis leaned forward, her gaze sharp but calm. Entrepreneurship is reshaping local markets, she began. Banks are paying attention in ways they never have before. The room stilled slightly. My father chuckled nervously, nodding. Yes, of course. Innovation is important, but true stability comes from institutions. Melis didn't look at him. Her eyes turned steady and unyielding toward me. Isolda, she said clearly, your company has caught our attention. We are impressed by what you've built. The fork slipped from my father's hand, clattering against his plate. Silence followed, heavy and absolute. Her company? He stammered. You mean, the hobby? Melis shook her head firmly. No hobby, a real business. Profitable, innovative. Exactly the kind of enterprise we want to explore partnerships with. I sat still, watching the color drain from my parents' faces. Relatives shifted uncomfortably, eyes darting between me and the hosts, who had never once introduced me with pride. Cressida's smile froze, her glass trembling slightly before she placed it back on the table. Inside, I felt the air change. The banker's words were my validation, but more than that, they were the verdict my family had refused to deliver. Years of being mocked, cropped from photos, billed for their pride, all undone in one sentence. My mother forced a brittle laugh. Well, isn't that something? We've always encouraged our daughters to pursue their passions. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. For the first time, the silence was mine, and it was powerful. Conversations stumbled forward again, guests trying to bridge the gap with polite questions, but the weight remained, pressing into every corner of the table. Melis continued, her voice firm. In fact, we'd like to discuss potential partnerships, but only with Isolda directly. The air thickened again. My father gripped his glass so tightly his knuckles whitened. Perhaps we could arrange a family meeting, my mother suggested quickly, her smile straining. No, Malis said, her tone final. I want to meet with her privately. She is the one who built this. She is the one we need to speak with. Cressida opened her mouth, then closed it. Her practiced grace faltered, replaced with something raw, panic. I watched, my face composed, my pulse steady. The spotlight had shifted, not gently but violently, and it wasn't moving back. The meal ended in strained silence. My parents avoided my eyes, focusing too intently on their plates. Cressida pushed food around without tasting it, her earlier glow extinguished. When Malis stood to leave, she turned to me, handing me her card with a knowing smile. Call me this week, she said. We have much to talk about. I nodded, slipping the card into my purse as if it were nothing extraordinary. Inside, my thoughts burned steady. For years they laughed, erased, borrowed, lied. Tonight, they heard the truth from the only mouth they respected more than mine. Maya Angelou's words echoed in me. When someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time. Tonight, my family showed me everything I needed to know. And just like that, the balance of power shifted forever. The suburban event hall had been decorated within an inch of its life. Candles lined the windows, floral arrangements sat heavy at each table, and a professional photographer circled like a hawk with his camera. My parents had called it a celebration dinner, meant to honor everyone in the family. But even as I stepped inside, I knew this was another attempt to showcase Cressida. Still, this time, something was different. They had hired a photographer to take an official family portrait, something to hang on the walls and post proudly online. For years, I had been cropped out, shoved to the margins, or left unnamed in captions. Tonight, they couldn't afford to erase me. Isolde, the photographer called, scanning the lineup my parents had arranged. No, don't stand on the end. Come closer. You're one of the daughters, aren't you? You should be next to your parents. My mother stiffened, but she nodded quickly, lips stretching into a practiced smile. My father muttered something about balance, but didn't argue. I walked forward, my heels striking against the wooden floor, and stood where the photographer indicated. Cressida's face tightened, her smile freezing as she was nudged slightly aside. For years, they cropped me out, I thought as the camera flashed. Now they need me in the frame, not for me, but for their image. The irony burned in my chest. For once, an outsider was dictating the arrangement, and my parents couldn't say a word without revealing the truth of how they'd treated me. The photographer adjusted the angle again. Isolde, you're the businesswoman, right? You should be in the middle. Cressida's jaw clenched as she shifted reluctantly. My parents smiled awkwardly, pretending it was what they had intended all along. Click. Another flash. This time, I didn't force a smile. I let my expression settle into calm resolve, letting the lens capture me exactly as I was. Later, dinner was served. Plates of steak and salmon arrived, glasses filled, and conversation swirled around me. But under the surface, I could feel something building, the weight of expectation pressing down. When dessert was finished and most guests had drifted toward the dance floor or coffee bar, my parents pulled me aside into a quieter corner of the hall. My mother held a careful smile, her hand on my arm. My father's expression was more serious, lines etched deep. Honey, my mother began, her voice low but syrupy. We were hoping you could help us with something. My father cleared his throat. It's just this once. We're behind on a few household expenses. Heating bills, repairs. You're so good with money. Family supports family, right? I said nothing at first, watching their faces. You know we raised you, my father added, his voice firming. It's only right to give back. I reached into my purse slowly, pulling out an envelope I had prepared days before. I pressed it into my father's hand. This should cover it, I said evenly. Relief flickered across my mother's face. My father opened the envelope, expecting gratitude, obedience. But before he could speak, I added, my voice cold and steady. This is the last check you'll ever cash in my name. The words fell heavy, louder than the music drifting from the main room. My parents froze, stunned. A few relatives nearby glanced over, whispers already spreading. My father blinked. "What did you say?" "You heard me," I replied. "You don't get to borrow my success and erase me at the same time. That ends tonight." My mother's smile faltered completely, her eyes darting nervously as though to control the scene. But there was no salvaging it. The chains they had kept on me, financial favors framed as family loyalty, were cut clean. It wasn't the money that made me furious. It was how they wielded it, how they used obligations as a leash to keep me small, to keep me in their story only when it benefited them. Steve Jobs' words echoed in my mind. "Your time is limited, so don't waste it living someone else's life." Tonight, I stopped living theirs. I turned away before they could answer, striding back through the hall. I caught fragments of murmurs. "Did you hear what she said?" "She gave them a check, but—" "No," she cut them off. The whispers would spread, faster than any story my parents had tried to craft. As I stepped outside into the cold winter night, the envelope was no longer in my hands. It burned in their conscience now, not mine. They thought cutting me out would erase me, I thought, drawing in the icy air. Instead, I erased their power over me. Days passed after the night I handed them the envelope and told them it was the last check they'd ever cash in my name. Winter deepened in Minneapolis. The streets outside my apartment were muffled with snow, but the silence that followed me was louder than any storm. At first, text messages trickled in, half phrases, awkward attempts at normalcy. My father sent one that simply read, "Hope you're doing okay." My mother's words were even thinner, "We should talk sometime." Then, the messages stopped. The family group chat, once filled with birthday reminders and vacation photos, became strangely still. Any time my name surfaced, the conversation derailed. Silence isn't peace. It's the echo of everything people don't dare say. By the end of the week, my parents asked me to come to dinner. "Just the four of us," my mother's message read. "We want to talk." Against my better judgment, I went. The house smelled the same as always: roast chicken, detergent, a faint trace of my father's aftershave. We sat at the old dining table, the same one where I had been called baby too many times to count. We ate in stilted silence until my mother finally reached across, her hand warm but heavy on mine. "We've always believed in you, honey," she said softly. I looked at her for a long moment. Then I shook my head. "No, you believed in the version of me that stayed small, the one you could manage. You never believed in this me." My father leaned forward, his brows knit. "We just wanted to protect you." I set my fork down, my voice calm but firm. "Protect me from what? From myself? Or from becoming bigger than your comfort zone?" The words landed like glass breaking. My mother's smile faltered, her eyes flicking away. Inside, my thoughts were sharp. Their apology isn't for me. It's to soothe their guilt. It's years too late, and it echoes hollow in this room. The meal limped along, scraps of conversation struggling to fill the air. My parents repeated old phrases, how proud they were, how they had always known I'd do something great. Every word sounded like they were speaking to an empty chair. After dinner, I slipped away into my childhood room. The posters on the wall were faded, curling at the edges. My old trophies still sat on a shelf. Soccer, spelling bees, participation awards my mother once displayed proudly. They weren't reminders of me. They were reminders of who I had been, the girl they remembered because she fit their narrative. They never met the woman I became, I thought, running my hand along the dusty desk where I once scribbled plans for projects no one encouraged. To them, safety had always equaled conformity. Stay small, stay manageable, stay close. To me, survival meant reinvention. Michelle Obama's words surfaced in my mind. Your story is what you have, what you will always have. It is something to own. Tonight, I claimed mine fully. The anger I once carried was gone. What remained was detachment. Their approval, I realized, was no longer a currency I needed. Later, I bundled myself in my coat and stepped outside. Snowflakes fell softly, the cold air biting at my cheeks. I breathed deeply, letting the crisp silence settle in my chest. "They may never understand me," I whispered into the night. "And that's fine, because I no longer need them to." I walked away from the house, not in anger, but in liberation. Their hollow apologies marked the beginning of peace for me. Not reconciliation, not repair, but peace. As I drove off, my phone buzzed against the console. A new message appeared on the screen. "From Cressida. We need to talk. It's urgent." I gripped the wheel tighter. Hollow apologies from my parents were one thing, but from her, I wasn't sure what I'd hear, or if I wanted to. The message from Cressida glared at me from my phone screen. "We need to talk. It's urgent." I stared at it for a long moment, the engine of my car idling in the driveway after leaving my parents' house. Hollow apologies from them had already drained me. But this, my sister, the golden child herself, was different. 2 days later, we met at a cafe downtown, neutral territory. The snow had turned slushy on the sidewalks, and my breath curled white in the late winter air. Inside, the cafe was warm, filled with the smell of espresso and toasted bagels. I chose a table by the window, far enough from the crowd that no one would eavesdrop. She arrived 10 minutes late, not her usual polished self. Her hair was hastily tied back, her blazer wrinkled, and there were dark circles beneath her eyes. For the first time, I saw cracks in her perfect image. She sat down heavily, exhaling as if the weight of the world clung to her shoulders. "Thanks for meeting me," she muttered, avoiding my eyes. "I almost didn't," I said flatly. Silence stretched between us, broken only by the hiss of the espresso machine. Finally, she blurted out, "I lost my job. The bank's restructuring, and they didn't renew my contract. And the bills are piling up." Her hands trembled as she stirred her untouched coffee. I studied her, my skepticism sharp. The golden child had lost her shine. For the first time, she looked human. "You want something from me?" I said. Her eyes flicked up, wet with unshed tears. "I need help, financially, just until I get back on my feet." I leaned back, remembering the countless nights in my apartment, the only light the glow of my laptop. I had stared at that dashboard, $5.7 million staring back at me, proof that I mattered even when no one else thought so. That was my anchor. While they laughed, that number kept me alive. "When I was mocked, I built," I said evenly. "When you were praised, you coasted." Her face tightened. "That's not fair." "It's the truth," I replied. Maya Angelou said, "I can be changed by what happens to me, but I refuse to be reduced by it. I refuse to let your ridicule reduce me. And that's the difference between us." For a long time, neither of us spoke. Outside, people hurried past in coats, their lives carrying on while ours sat suspended. Finally, she whispered, "We're family, right? Family helps each other." I leaned forward, my voice firm. Family isn't just blood. Family is who shows up when no one else does. Where were you when I needed support? You were standing beside them, laughing. Her lips parted, but no words came. Tears welled in her eyes. I reached into my purse and pulled out a card, Mélis Dufour's banker's card. I slid it across the table. "If you want help, pitch your ideas, just like I did. No handouts, no illusions. You stand on your own, or you don't stand at all." She stared at the card, stunned. "You're serious?" "Dead serious," I said. It wasn't cruelty, it was truth. For years, I begged for their validation. Now you're begging for my support. But the rules have changed. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. Years of being erased, turned into a shadow, had ended here. I had redrawn the boundaries, not with malice, but with finality. When she didn't respond, I stood, pulling on my coat. "I hope you figure it out, but don't confuse blood with loyalty. One is biology, the other is choice." Outside, the air was sharp and cold. but it filled my lungs with something lighter than oxygen. Freedom. I walked slowly down the street, the sound of my boots crunching in the snow, the only rhythm I needed. I didn't walk away from family. I walked toward myself. Oprah's words echoed in my head. Doing the best at this moment puts you in the best place for the next moment. And tonight, the best was leaving behind the weight I had carried for too long. I no longer carried anger. What I carried now was clarity, liberation. They once mocked my little startup, I thought, glancing at the cafe behind me. Now it stood taller than their pride. The last laugh wasn't loud. It was steady, silent, and mine. Because blood isn't always family. Sometimes family is the ones who finally let you be seen.